Hey there, tonight we go into a world you wouldn't recognize. A world where your breath freezes into crystalline patterns before your eyes, and where the very ground beneath you groans under mountains of advancing ice. We're venturing into the Ice Age, and you probably won't survive the first winter, let alone the 100,000 years that follow. So, before you drift off completely, like this video and subscribe, only if this kind of sleepy narration is your thing. And hey, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is on your end. Now, kill the overhead lights, maybe light a candle, and let's get into some history. The world is cooling. Not gradually, not gently, but with the kind of meteorological mood swing that would make even your most temperamental relative seem stable by comparison. About 2.6 million years ago, Earth entered what scientists call the Pleistocene epoch, though no one was around to give it such a fancy name at the time. Our early human ancestors were too busy trying not to freeze to death to bother with geological terminology. The Pleistocene was characterized by something rather dramatic: glacial cycles. Imagine ice, sheets up to 2 miles thick, spreading across continents like slow-motion tsunamis, then retreating, then advancing again. These weren't quick weekend getaways of coldness. Each glacial period lasted roughly 100,000 years, interrupted by brief interglacial warm spells of about 10,000 years. When I say brief, I mean brief in geological terms. For humans living through them, a 10,000-year warm spell would have spanned roughly 400 generations. Not exactly a quick weather blip. You're probably sleeping in climate-controlled comfort right now. So let me paint this picture more vividly. During the height of glaciation, global temperatures averaged about 5 to 10 degrees Celsius cooler than today. In the northern regions, we're talking 20 degrees Celsius colder. Your morning commute would involve trudging through permafrost, not puddles. The sea level dropped by up to 120 meters as water locked into those massive ice sheets. Manhattan wasn't worrying about rising sea levels. It was 100 miles from the ocean. Florida was twice its current size. Real estate opportunities abounded if you enjoyed property with a nice view of a barren, wind-blasted tundra. What caused all this? Broadly speaking, something called Milankovitch cycles, variations in Earth's orbit and axis that affected how much solar radiation reached different parts of the planet. It's like someone slowly adjusting a cosmic thermostat, except that someone is the cold, impersonal mechanics of planetary motion. There were other factors too: changing ocean currents, variations in atmospheric carbon dioxide, and feedback loops involving ice reflectivity. Once ice starts spreading, it reflects more sunlight back into space, cooling things further, leading to more ice. It's a vicious cycle of coldness. Our ancestors, various species of Homo, including Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, eventually Neanderthals, and Homo sapiens, found themselves facing this climatic roller coaster without central heating, Gore-Tex, or hot chocolate. The earliest human species evolved in tropical Africa staying warm wasn't exactly top of the survival priority list. Suddenly, geologically speaking, they needed to figure out how to not die in environments that seemed designed specifically to kill them. The Ice Age wasn't just cold, it was dry. As water became locked in ice, rainfall patterns shifted dramatically. Forests retreated, replaced by vast steppes and tundra, open landscapes with few trees, but plenty of grasses and herbs that could support large herbivores. Picture endless plains stretching to the horizon, punctuated by the occasional stunted tree, windswept and bent like an old man permanently leaning into a gale. These new environments were home to creatures straight out of a fever dream megafauna that would make modern wildlife look like a disappointing petting zoo. Woolly mammoths standing 4 meters tall at the shoulder, their tusks curving up to 4 meters long. Cave bears 30% larger than grizzlies. Lions that would make Simba wet himself in terror. And let's not forget about the woolly rhinoceros, giant deer, with antlers spanning 3.5 meters, and hyenas the size of lions. Our ancestors weren't the apex predators in this frozen world. They were somewhere in the middle of the food chain, trying desperately not to become lunch, while simultaneously figuring out how to make lunch out of creatures many times their size. It was a precarious existence, to put it mildly. But here's where the story gets interesting, where the human capacity for adaptation begins to shine. Because, unlike many species that simply migrated to stay within their preferred climate zone, early humans began to adapt to the cold. They didn't just survive the Ice Age, they figured out how to thrive in it. The first and perhaps most crucial adaptation was behavioral rather than biological. Early humans started to think differently about their environment. Instead of seeing cold as simply an enemy, they began to understand it, to work with it rather than against it. They observed animal behaviors, noticing how creatures with far less brain power managed to survive winter after winter. They watched birds migrate, bears hibernate, and wolves hunt in coordinated packs. And they learned. One of the great scholarly debates revolves around exactly when humans began to adapt to colder climates. Some evidence suggests that as early as 1.8 million years ago, Homo erectus was venturing into the cooler environments of northern China and the Caucasus. By about 500,000 years ago, Homo heidelbergensis was definitely living in parts of Europe, enduring seasonal changes that would have included fairly harsh winters. But here's a quirky tidbit for you. Many anthropologists believe that early humans in these cooler environments may have practiced what's called seasonal migration, essentially following herds of animals south for the winter, then north in summer. It was like being a prehistoric snowbird, except instead of retiring to Florida in a comfortable RV, you were walking hundreds of miles while trying not to be eaten by cave hyenas. Not exactly a relaxing lifestyle change. The most intense periods of glaciation, what we typically think of as the Ice Age, with ice sheets covering much of North America and Europe, peaked at various points over the last 100,000 years. The most recent glacial maximum occurred about 20,000 years ago, when ice covered all of Canada, much of the northern United States, and northern Europe. Sea levels were so low that you could have walked from France to England, or from Siberia to Alaska, which, as we'll discuss later, is exactly what some humans did. What's truly remarkable about this story is that it's not just about survival. It's about innovation under pressure. The challenging environments of the Ice Age may have been exactly what pushed human cognitive and social development forward. There's some evidence that brain size in human species increased during the Pleistocene, possibly in response to the complex problem solving required to survive in such harsh conditions. Think about it. When the environment is stable and resources are abundant, there's little pressure to innovate. But when each winter brings the very real possibility of starvation or freezing to death, suddenly those with the ability to plan ahead, create better tools, coordinate with others, and think abstractly about future problems have a significant advantage. Natural selection began to favor the clever, the cooperative, and the creative. The Ice Age didn't just shape our bodies, it shaped our minds. It pushed us toward becoming the strange, contradictory creatures we are today, capable of both extraordinary cooperation and shocking violence, of meticulous planning and impulsive decision-making. In a very real sense, we are children of the ice, our modern capabilities forged in the crucible of a frozen world that, by all rights, should have killed us many times over. Surviving the Ice Age wasn't just about enduring cold. It was about reimagining what it meant to be human. The Ice Age sculpted human bodies with the same relentless patience it used to carve valleys through mountains, while cultural adaptations, the things we'll discuss in later, happened relatively quickly. Biological changes moved at the glacial pace of natural selection. Yet, over thousands of generations, the cold worked its transformative magic on human physiology. Let's start with the most obvious adaptation: body shape. If you've ever wondered why people whose ancestors evolved in cold climates tend to be stockier with shorter limbs, you can thank a German anatomist named Carl Bergman and an American zoologist named Joel Allen. In the 19th century, they formulated what are now known as Bergman's and Allen's rules, ecological principles that explain why animals in colder regions typically have more compact bodies and shorter extremities than their warm climate cousins. The science is simple: heat conservation. A bulkier body with shorter limbs has less surface area relative to volume, which means less heat escapes. It's basic geometry applied to survival. Neanderthals, who lived in Europe during some of the coldest periods, exemplified this adaptation perfectly. They had barrel chests, powerful limbs, and bodies built like cold weather tanks. Modern humans who evolved in northern climates show similar, if less extreme, adaptations. But the reshaping didn't stop at proportions. The very structure of the nose changed in response to cold, dry air. Breathe in frigid air through a flat, wide nose, and it rushes straight to your lungs, potentially chilling your body from the inside out. Not ideal when you're already fighting to maintain core temperature. Populations that evolved in cold environments developed narrower, more projecting noses with longer nasal passages. This architecture created more surface area inside the nose, giving the body more time to warm and humidify air before it reached the sensitive lung tissue. There's a quirky detail here that archaeologists rarely mention at dinner parties. Boogers had survival value. The increased mucus production in these specialized nasal passages helped trap dust and pathogens while humidifying air. That glob of snot you unceremoniously wipe away. Your Ice Age ancestors might have owed their survival partly to its predecessors. Fat distribution patterns also shifted in cold-adapted populations. Subcutaneous fat, the layer just beneath the skin, increased, providing better insulation. But this wasn't just any fat. Cold-adapted humans developed more brown adipose tissue, sometimes called good fat. Unlike the white fat that stores energy, brown fat actively burns calories to generate heat in a process called thermogenesis. Infants have abundant brown fat, which helps them regulate temperature, but adults retain some too, especially those with ancestry in cold regions. Speaking of burning calories, Ice Age humans needed a lot of them. Living in the cold is energetically expensive. Your body burns through fuel much faster when it's constantly fighting to maintain a 37 degrees Celsius internal temperature in freezing environments. Estimates suggest that hunter-gatherers in Ice Age Europe might have needed up to 4,000 to 5,000 calories daily during winter months, roughly twice what the average modern sedentary person requires. This caloric demand drove another adaptation: metabolic efficiency. Some populations developed metabolisms that were particularly good at extracting energy from fatty foods, an advantageous trait when much of your diet consisted of the fat-rich meat of large mammals. This efficient metabolism helped people survive periods of food scarcity, which were common during the harshest months. Of course, these metabolic adaptations have complex legacies in the modern world. Some populations with Ice Age ancestry in cold regions now face higher rates of certain metabolic disorders when exposed to modern diets high in simple carbohydrates. What was once a survival advantage in an environment of scarcity becomes problematic in an environment of abundance. A sobering reminder that our bodies still carry the genetic memory of that frozen world. The Ice Age also reshaped human skin in ways both visible and invisible. Skin color, contrary to popular belief, isn't just about sun exposure. It's also about vitamin D in northern latitudes with less sunlight, particularly during long winter months. Lighter skin improved vitamin D production. Without sufficient vitamin D, bones weaken, immune systems falter, and depression sets in not ideal combinations for survival. The depigmentation of skin in northern populations represents a careful evolutionary balance between reduced protection from UV radiation, less necessary at higher latitudes, and improved vitamin D synthesis beneath that skin blood vessels adapted to. Cold-adapted populations developed more efficient peripheral vasoconstriction, the ability to quickly reduce blood flow to extremities when temperatures drop, preserving core temperature at the expense of fingers and toes. It's a tough bargain. Better to risk frostbite than to let your core temperature drop to fatal levels. Some modern populations with long histories in Arctic regions still show remarkable cold tolerance in their extremities, able to maintain dexterity at temperatures that would leave others with numb, useless fingers. But adaptation isn't just about adding new capabilities. Sometimes it's about keeping what might otherwise be lost. Take lactase persistence, the ability to digest milk into adulthood. While not directly a cold adaptation, it became increasingly valuable in northern European populations during the Ice Age and its aftermath. Milk provided crucial calories and vitamin D during winter months when other food sources were scarce. The mutation that allows adults to digest lactose spread rapidly through these populations, one of the strongest signals of recent natural selection in the human genome. These biological adaptations didn't happen in isolation. They occurred alongside and in response to cultural adaptations. The tools, techniques, and social structures humans were developing. Biology and culture engaged in an evolutionary dance, each influencing the other across generations. For example, as humans developed better clothing, the selective pressure for extreme biological cold adaptation decreased somewhat. You didn't need quite as much natural insulation when you could wrap yourself in the fur of other, better insulated animals. This relationship between biological and cultural adaptation, what scientists call gene culture coevolution, is a uniquely human phenomenon that allowed our species to colonize environments that would have otherwise remained off limits. Of course, not all adaptations were physical. The brain itself changed, though in ways more subtle and harder to detect in the fossil record. Surviving in extreme cold requires sophisticated planning abilities. You can't just live day to day when winter lasts months. Archaeological evidence suggests Ice Age humans developed enhanced capabilities for forethought, resource management, and mental mapping of territories that might be obscured by snow for long periods. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether the challenging environments of the Ice Age actually accelerated human cognitive evolution. Some researchers argue that the complex problem-solving required for cold weather survival, from tracking animals across snow to predicting weather patterns, pushed human intelligence forward faster than it might have evolved in more forgiving environments. Others point out that tropical environments present their own complex challenges, requiring sophisticated solutions. The debate continues, but what's clear is that the Ice Age demanded cognitive flexibility and innovation on an unprecedented scale. One fascinating adaptation that's rarely discussed is changing sleep patterns. Evidence suggests that humans in northern latitudes evolved to need more sleep during winter months, an adaptation that might have helped conserve energy during periods when food was scarce and darkness abundant. This seasonal variation in sleep requirements persists in some northern populations today, manifesting as conditions like seasonal affective disorder when disrupted by modern lifestyles that demand consistent year-round productivity. The cold also left its mark on human immune systems. Pathogens behave differently in cold environments. Some thrive, others diminish. Ice Age populations faced unique disease pressures that shaped immune responses over generations. Some researchers believe certain immune variants common in European populations today evolved in response to Ice Age conditions, though this remains an active area of investigation. Perhaps most poignantly, the Ice Age affected human reproductive biology. Pregnancy and early infancy are energetically expensive and thermally vulnerable states. Evidence suggests that birth seasonality, the tendency for births to cluster at certain times of year, became more pronounced in Ice Age populations, with conceptions timed to produce births in spring or early summer rather than in the depths of winter. This required not just biological adaptation, but cultural practices around mating and reproduction. Another example of the interplay between biology and culture. What's remarkable about all these adaptations is that they occurred without any understanding of the mechanisms involved. No Ice Age human knew about genetics or natural selection, thermodynamics, or metabolic efficiency. They simply lived, died, reproduced, or didn't, according to how well their bodies and behaviors suited the frozen world around them. Generation by generation, the cold sculpted our ancestors into new forms, favoring traits that might seem subtle individually, but collectively transformed what it meant to be human. Fire dances in the darkness of your imagination now, a small flame at first, tentative and fragile against the vast coldness of an Ice Age night. This isn't just any technology we're discussing. This is humanity's first true ally against the merciless cold, our original weapon against the darkness. Without fire, our story of Ice Age survival would have been dramatically shorter and considerably more tragic. The relationship between humans and fire long predates the Ice Age. Archaeological evidence suggests that Homo erectus was controlling fire as early as 1.5 million years ago, though routine, habitual use probably began closer to to 400,000 years ago. By the time the major glaciations of the late Pleistocene rolled around, fire was already an old friend. But in the context of the Ice Age, fire wasn't just helpful, it became absolutely essential, transforming from useful tool to central organizing principle of human existence. Let's start with the obvious: warmth. When temperatures plummet to minus 30 degrees Celsius or lower, as they commonly did in glacial Europe and Asia, the human body simply cannot maintain its core temperature through metabolism alone. Even with biological adaptations and furs wrapped around your shivering frame, prolonged exposure meant death. Fire created microclimates of survivability, small pockets of warmth in a world locked in ice. Fire also extended the day. The Ice Age wasn't just cold, it was dark. At higher latitudes during winter months, daylight might last only a few hours. Without artificial light, human activity would have been severely constrained. Fire pushed back the darkness, allowing for social interaction, tool-making, and other crucial activities during the long nights. This extension of productive time gave fire-wielding humans a significant advantage over other species locked into purely diurnal patterns. But perhaps the most transformative aspect of fire was its effect on food. Raw meat is difficult to digest, requiring significant energy to break down. Cooking predigests food, making more calories available and reducing the energy needed for digestion. In an environment where every calorie mattered, this metabolic efficiency was a game changer. Some anthropologists argue that cooking was so metabolically advantageous that it actually drove human evolution, allowing for smaller guts and bigger brains. A controversial but intriguing hypothesis known as the cooking hypothesis. There's a quirky tidbit about Ice Age cooking that doesn't make it into most textbooks. In extremely cold environments, cooking wasn't always about applying heat. Sometimes it was about preventing freezing. Imagine hunting a mammoth in minus 20 degrees C weather. The moment the animal dies, its body begins to cool. Within hours, the meat freezes solid, like trying to eat a woolly popsicle. Without fire to thaw frozen food, much of the bounty from large kills would have been inaccessible during winter months. Fire did more than just cook meat. It expanded the range of plants humans could eat. Many wild plants contain toxins or antinutrients that make them indigestible or even poisonous in their raw state. Cooking neutralizes many of these compounds. In a glacial environment where plant diversity was already limited, the ability to detoxify additional plant species through cooking could have been the difference between starvation and survival during lean periods. The social impact of fire cannot be overstated. Hearths became the central organizing feature of Ice Age sites, not just physically, but socially. Evidence from archaeological sites shows that activities clustered around hearths, which served as focal points for what archaeologists call social reproduction, the transmission of knowledge, skills, and cultural practices from one generation to the next. Imagine children learning to nap flint by firelight, elders telling stories that preserved crucial survival information, and group bonding occurring in the warm, light-filled bubble that pushed back against the hostile darkness. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether control of fire actually altered human sleep patterns. Some researchers argue that artificial light disrupted our previously more fragmented sleep schedule, leading to the consolidated 7 to 8 hour sleep pattern most modern humans experience. Others suggest that extended darkness in northern latitudes during Ice Age winters would have naturally produced longer sleep periods regardless of fire use. What's clear is that fire gave humans options, the choice to remain active despite darkness, a luxury no other species enjoyed. Maintaining fire in Ice Age conditions presented unique challenges. The very environments that made fire most necessary cold, often wet, with limited vegetation, also made it most difficult to sustain. Ice Age humans developed sophisticated fire-making technologies in response. They created specialized fire drills, used pyrite struck against flint to generate sparks, and most importantly, developed methods for banking fires, keeping embers alive for days or weeks to avoid having to start fresh. Fire transport became a crucial skill. Moving from one location to another meant bringing fire along, not an easy task in windy, snowy conditions. Archaeological evidence suggests humans carried embers in hollow fungi, certain types of slow-burning wood, or clay containers. Imagine the responsibility of being your group's fire carrier, knowing that if the ember died, your entire band might follow. The psychological impact of fire during the Ice Age deserves special consideration. In a world of overwhelming cold and darkness, fire provided not just physical warmth, but psychological comfort. The natural human attraction to flames, what some call pyrophilia, may have evolved precisely because of fire's critical role in our survival through the coldest periods of human existence. Even today, the comfort we take in a flickering flame may be an echo of our ancestors' dependence on fire during the harshest periods of the Pleistocene. Fire also served as protection from the megafauna that dominated Ice Age landscapes. Cave lions, dire wolves, and cave hyenas were all formidable predators that generally avoided flame. A well-placed campfire could keep a human band relatively safe from nocturnal predation, an important consideration when you're sharing the landscape with carnivores significantly larger and more powerful than anything alive today. The technological sophistication of Ice Age fire management extended to hearth construction. Archaeological sites reveal carefully constructed fire pits lined with stones to retain and radiate heat, sometimes positioned to reflect warmth against cave walls for maximum efficiency. Some sites show evidence of what might have been primitive chimney systems that helped manage smoke in enclosed spaces, a crucial consideration when living in caves or other shelters during winter months. Speaking of smoke, it served purposes beyond just being an unfortunate byproduct. Smoke was used to preserve meat, extending its usable life, critical during periodic abundance, when a successful large animal hunt might provide more meat than could be immediately consumed. Smoking helped prevent both spoilage and attacks by other scavengers and insects, allowing Ice Age humans to convert temporary abundance into longer-term food security. Fire also transformed the relationship between humans and materials. Hide processing, for instance, benefited enormously from controlled heating. Raw animal hides are stiff and rot quickly. Processed hides become soft, durable leather. Heat helped remove fat from hides and accelerated the curing process. Without fire, the sophisticated clothing necessary for Ice Age survival, which we'll explore in the next section, would have been impossible to create. Tool-making similarly expanded through pyrotechnology. By the Upper Paleolithic, humans were heat-treating flint to improve its knapping properties, creating sharper, more durable tools. Some researchers believe that early experiments in working with naturally occurring copper and meteoric iron might have occurred during the late Pleistocene, laying the conceptual groundwork for the metallurgy that would emerge after the Ice Age. Most profoundly, fire altered human evolution itself by creating protected microenvironments. Fire reduced the selective pressure for extreme biological adaptation to cold. You didn't need to evolve a polar bear's metabolism if you could create your own portable pocket of tropical temperature. This buffering effect allowed humans to maintain certain biological traits that might otherwise have been selected against in extreme cold, potentially including some of the neurological features that underpin our complex cognition. The relationship between humans and fire was so fundamental that it appears in the mythology of cultures worldwide. Fire theft narratives, stories where a cultural hero steals fire from gods or animals and gives it to humans, appear across continents and language families. From Prometheus in Greek mythology to the fire theft stories of indigenous American cultures, these narratives reflect the central importance of fire to human identity and survival. They aren't just stories, they're cultural memories of a time when fire meant the difference between life and death during the harshest seasons of the Ice Age. By the late Pleistocene, humans weren't just using fire, they had developed a sophisticated, nuanced relationship with it. Different types of wood were selected for different purposes, some for heat, others for light, still others for smoke production or cooking specific foods. This wasn't just technological knowledge, but a complex ecological understanding of the properties of different plant species and how they interacted with flame. As the glaciers of the last Ice Age began their final retreat around 11,700 years ago, fire remained central to human life, but its role began to shift. In the warming world of the early Holocene, fire became increasingly important for landscape management, particularly as agriculture emerged. The end of the Ice Age didn't diminish fire's importance. It simply changed our relationship with this most ancient technology. What remains remarkable is how completely fire transformed human existence during the Ice Age. Without it, we might never have expanded into the colder regions of the planet. We might never have developed the social complexity that emerged around hearths during long winter nights. We might, in fact, have remained a primarily tropical species, our history and evolution following an entirely different path. We are, in a very real sense, children not just of ice, but of flame. The wind cuts through you like a flint blade, carrying ice crystals that sting any exposed skin. The temperature has plummeted to Celsius, and the blizzard has reduced visibility to mere meters. A wolf would survive perhaps a day in these conditions. A bear might last longer, thanks to its thick layer of fat. But you, with your relatively hairless body, evolved for the heat of African savannas, should be dead within hours. And yet you survive, walking through this frozen landscape, wrapped in an ingenious second skin, clothing that represents one of humanity's most underappreciated technological revolutions. The archaeological evidence for early clothing is frustratingly sparse. Unlike stone tools that can survive for millennia, organic materials like animal hides rapidly decompose unless preserved in exceptional conditions. But we can piece together the story through indirect evidence, and what emerges is a tale of remarkable innovation driven by desperate necessity. When exactly did humans begin wearing clothes? The genetic analysis of human body lice offers a surprising clue. These parasites evolved from head lice and specifically adapted to live in clothing. By analyzing the genetic divergence between head and body lice, researchers estimate that humans began wearing clothes regularly between 80,000 and 170,000 years ago, well before humans moved into the truly cold environments of Ice Age Europe. But these early garments were likely simple, wrapping affairs, hardly adequate for the brutal conditions of glacial periods. As humans pushed into colder environments, particularly after 40,000 years ago, clothing needed to become more sophisticated, more tailored, more effective. It wasn't enough to simply drape yourself in an animal hide. Survival demanded something more engineered. Enter the needle, a tiny tool that changed everything. The earliest known eyed needles date to around 40,000 years ago, coinciding with human expansion into some of the coldest environments of the Pleistocene. These weren't crude, makeshift implements, but finely crafted tools made from animal bone, often no thicker than a modern sewing needle. Creating such delicate instruments required immense skill and specialized knowledge that would have been passed down through generations of what we might call Ice Age tailors. The invention of the needle transformed clothing from simple wraps to fitted garments that could be layered for maximum insulation. Suddenly, sleeves were possible. Pants could be crafted. Hoods could be attached to coats. The technological leap is comparable to the jump from rafts to sailboats. Same basic principle, entirely different capability. There's a quirky tidbit about Ice Age clothing that's rarely mentioned. The thread posed as much of a technological challenge as the needle. You can't sew without something to sew with. Ice Age humans developed methods for creating thread from plant fibers, animal sinew, and even human hair. Sinew, the tough connective tissue from animal tendons, made particularly effective thread, but it required extensive processing to render it flexible and usable. Imagine the hours of careful work, scraping, stretching, splitting, and twisting sinew into usable lengths of thread by the flickering light of a hearth while the wind howled outside your shelter. The sophistication of Ice Age clothing is often underestimated in popular imagination. We tend to picture crude, shapeless hide garments, essentially animal skins thrown haphazardly over human shoulders. Archaeological evidence suggests otherwise. Impressions of woven textiles found on small clay objects from sites like Dalny Vestanis around 29,000 years ago indicate that Ice Age humans weren't just using untreated animal skins. They were creating actual textiles through techniques like twining and knotting plant fibers. Let's consider what a complete Ice Age clothing ensemble might have looked like during the coldest periods. Start with an inner layer of soft, processed hides worn against the skin, perhaps from rabbits or other small mammals with particularly fine fur. Add a middle layer of insulating material, possibly dried grasses or mosses stuffed between two hide layers, creating a primitive form of the same insulation technique used in modern cold weather gear. Top it with an outer layer of waterproof material sealskin in coastal areas, or the hides of larger mammals treated with fats to increase water resistance. For the extremities, evidence suggests mittens rather than gloves. Keeping the fingers together conserves heat more effectively. Lined boots made from multiple layers and close-fitting hoods that could be drawn tight around the face. The entire ensemble would have been sewn with sinew thread using bone needles, with each garment custom fitted to its wearer. Some sites in Russia have yielded remains of Ice Age clothing decorated with thousands of tiny beads made from mammoth ivory, each one requiring significant time to manufacture and attach. This wasn't just functional attire. It was a statement of identity, status, and artistry, even in the harshest environments. Perhaps especially in the harshest environments, humans found ways to express themselves through what they wore. The processing of hides for clothing represented a complex technological chain that required specialized knowledge. A fresh hide is a problematic material. It rots quickly, stiffens when dried, and remains attractive to scavengers and insects. Transforming it into usable leather required multiple steps. scraping off fat and tissue, treating with solutions made from animal brains or certain plants. Both contain natural chemicals that help preserve and soften the hide, stretching, smoking, and sometimes repeated wetting and drying. Modern experimental archaeologists who have attempted to reproduce these processes using only Ice Age technologies report that a single hide might require 15 to 20 hours of processing before it becomes suitable for clothing. Now multiply that by the number of hides needed to outfit an entire band for winter. The labor investment was enormous. A fascinating scholarly debate revolves around the gendered division of labor in Ice Age clothing production. Some researchers argue that clothing manufacture was primarily women's work, based on ethnographic parallels with recent hunter-gatherer societies. Others point out that in extreme environments where clothing meant survival, the entire community likely participated in various stages of production. The archaeological evidence remains inconclusive, but what's clear is that clothing production wasn't a casual activity. It was essential, skilled labor critical to group survival. For Ice Age humans, clothing wasn't just about warmth. It was about moisture management. In extremely cold environments, sweat can be deadly. It wets your insulating layers and then freezes, potentially causing more heat loss than if you'd worn nothing at all. Evidence suggests that Ice Age clothing systems included methods for ventilation and moisture control, perhaps through adjustable closures or layering systems that could be modified during different activities. Clothing also needed to allow for movement. Hunting, in particular, required garments that permitted the full range of motion needed to track, pursue, and kill prey animals. The solution appears to have been tailored clothing with strategic seams placed to allow flexibility, a design principle still used in modern performance, where some clothing items served dual purposes: bags and pouches, essentially small garments sewn shut, allowed hunters to carry essential tools and materials. The same technology used for clothing enabled the creation of these carrying devices, another example of how a single innovation, the eyed needle, cascaded into multiple applications that enhanced survival. One aspect of Ice Age clothing rarely discussed is its psychological impact. Being properly clothed didn't just keep you physically warm, it provided psychological comfort in an environment that was constantly threatening. The feeling of security that came from being protected against the elements shouldn't be underestimated as a factor in human resilience during this challenging period. Clothing also became a way to express group identity. Different bands or tribes likely had distinctive styles, decoration patterns, or manufacturing techniques that identified members as belonging to particular groups. In a sparsely populated landscape where encountering strangers was rare but significant, these visual signals would have conveyed important information about alliances, territories, and potential marriage networks. The sophistication of Ice Age clothing technology is perhaps best illustrated by the clothing worn by the Iceman Ötzi, who died in the Alps around 5,300 years ago, admittedly after the end of the Pleistocene, but likely representing technologies developed during the Ice Age. Ötzi wore a complex layered outfit, including a woven grass cape, leggings, loincloth, belt, hat, and shoes stuffed with grass for insulation. His well-preserved clothing revealed sophisticated sewing techniques, strategic use of different animal hides for different garments, and practical design elements like leather patches reinforcing areas of high wear. Ice Age clothing technologies weren't static. They evolved rapidly as humans pushed into colder environments and faced new challenges. The clothing worn by early modern humans entering Europe around 45,000 years ago was likely quite different from the sophisticated garments developed by the Gravettian culture during the last glacial maximum around 20,000 years ago. Each generation improved upon the knowledge of the last, adding refinements and innovations that enhanced purfur. The most profound aspect of Ice Age clothing is how it fundamentally altered the relationship between humans and their environment. Clothing created a portable microclimate that traveled with the wearer, allowing humans to venture into landscapes that would otherwise have been lethal. It represented a kind of environmental engineering, not changing the world to suit the human body, but creating a buffer that mediated between body and world. This buffer had evolutionary implications. Once effective clothing was developed, the selective pressure for extreme biological adaptations to cold diminished. Clothing allowed humans to maintain their tropical physiology while living in Arctic conditions, a technological workaround to what would otherwise have required thousands of generations of biological adaptation. As the Ice Age wound down and temperatures warmed, clothing didn't disappear. It diversified. Different environments called for different solutions. The technologies developed during the crucible of the coldest periods provided a foundation for textile traditions that would eventually lead to the complex weaving traditions of later periods. What's clear is that without the revolution in clothing technology that occurred during the Ice Age, human expansion into northern latitudes would have been impossible. No amount of fire or shelter could have compensated for the heat loss experienced by an unclothed human body in glacial conditions. The humble needle and the garments it helped create quite literally opened up half the world to human habitation. The next time you zip up your jacket against winter chill, take a moment to appreciate that you're participating in a technological tradition refined in the most extreme environmental challenge our species has ever faced, a tradition of needle and thread that helped transform humans from a tropical species into a global one. The hunt begins at dawn. You emerge from your shelter into the biting cold, your breath crystallizing instantly. In your hand, is a spear unlike anything nature could produce, a perfect fusion of wood, stone, and sinew, designed with a precision that speaks of generations of accumulated knowledge. This isn't just a tool, it's the difference between feast and famine in a world where calories are precious and scarce. Ice Age hunting technologies represent some of the most sophisticated innovations of the Pleistocene. These weren't simple sticks sharpened at one end, but complex, composite tools engineered for specific prey and hunting conditions. The archaeological record reveals an explosion of hunting innovation during the coldest periods, suggesting that necessity truly was the mother of invention. Let's start with the most iconic Ice Age hunting tool, the spear. Early spears were simple wooden implements, effective but limited. By the Middle Paleolithic, Neanderthals were creating wooden spears with fire-hardened tips, like those found at Schöningen in Germany dating to around 300,000 years ago. These were formidable weapons, capable of bringing down large prey, but they required close engagement with dangerous animals, essentially a high-risk, high-reward strategy. The real revolution came with the development of composite tools, weapons made from multiple materials, each chosen for specific properties. Stone tips attached to wooden shafts created weapons that were sharper, more lethal, and more durable than wood alone. The attachment methods were sophisticated, involving precise hafting techniques, using resins, sinew bindings, and carefully carved notches and grooves to ensure the point remained fixed during impact. There's a quirky tidbit about Ice Age hunting tools that's rarely mentioned. Some researchers believe certain spear point designs actually included deliberate weak points, intentional failure zones that would cause the point to break off inside the animal, causing continued internal damage even if the animal initially escaped. It's a stark reminder that these weren't just tools, but lethal technologies designed specifically to kill as efficiently as possible. As the Ice Age progressed, hunting technologies diversified and specialized. Around 20,000 and 30,000 years ago, humans developed the spear thrower, also known as an atlatl, a deceptively simple device that effectively extended the hunter's arm, dramatically increasing the velocity and distance of spear throws. This innovation created a crucial advantage. It allowed hunters to strike from a safer distance, reducing the risk of dangerous close encounters. With Ice Age megafauna, the spear thrower works on the lever principle, typically consisting of a shaft about 50 centimeters long with a hook at one end that engages with a depression in the butt of the spear. When thrown, the extra length provided by the spear thrower increases the arc of the throwing motion, storing and then releasing more energy than is possible with the arm alone. Experimental archaeology has shown that skilled users can throw spears with twice the force and at substantially greater distances using this technology. Archaeological evidence of spear throwers comes from sites across Europe and the Americas, often in the form of elaborately carved examples made from mammoth ivory or reindeer antler. Many feature stunning animal sculptures that served as both functional hooks and symbolic representations of prey species or spirit helpers, a beautiful marriage of technology, art, and spirituality. The most sophisticated projectile technology of the Ice Age was the bow and arrow, which appeared at least 18,000 years ago in Europe, and possibly much earlier in Africa. The bow represented a quantum leap in hunting capability, increasing distance, accuracy, and the number of projectiles a hunter could carry. A single hunter with a bow could carry dozens of arrows rather than just a few spears, fundamentally changing hunting strategies. The construction of bows required deep understanding of wood properties, as different parts of the bow needed different characteristics: elasticity in some areas, rigidity in others. The best bows used specific portions of specific trees, harvested at particular times of year, then carefully shaped and seasoned. Arrow shafts needed to be straight and balanced, which often involved sophisticated straightening techniques using heat and pressure. Fletchings, stabilizing vanes, typically made from bird feathers, had to be precisely attached to ensure accuracy in flight. Beyond projectile weapons, Ice Age hunters developed an array of specialized tools for processing the animals they killed. Stone knives, scrapers, and burins, chisel-like tools for working bone and antler, allowed efficient butchering and processing of carcasses. Complete butchering toolkits have been found at Ice Age sites, with different tools specialized for different tasks, from initial hide removal to fine processing of tendons for sinew. But hunting wasn't just about the tools. It was about techniques and strategies that evolved to address the unique challenges of Ice Age environments. One particularly effective method was ambush hunting at natural bottlenecks in the landscape. Hunters would identify places where topography naturally channeled animal movements, narrow valleys, river crossings, or passages between lakes or cliffs, and position themselves to intercept prey. This strategy minimized the need for long-distance pursuit, conserving precious calories. Another sophisticated technique was the hunting surround, where groups of hunters coordinated to encircle prey, cutting off escape routes. Archaeological evidence from sites in France and Ukraine suggests that some bands constructed artificial funnels or drive lines to channel herd animals toward waiting hunters, or even over cliffs. These communal hunting methods required sophisticated planning and communication, evidence of the social complexity that was developing alongside technological innovation. In areas where the ground was permanently frozen, some groups developed specialized ivory or bone points designed specifically to break through frozen carcasses, allowing them to access meat from animals that had died naturally, essentially scavenging as a supplement to active hunting. This demonstrates how tool technology adapted not just to different prey, but to different environmental conditions. One fascinating scholarly debate centers on the role of persistent hunting during the Ice Age. This technique, observed ethnographically in some recent hunter-gatherer groups, involves pursuing an animal for hours or even days, never allowing it to rest until it collapses from exhaustion. Some researchers argue that humans with their thermoregulatory advantages, sweating, relative hairlessness, could outlast prey in tests of endurance, particularly in snow where tracking was simplified. Others question whether the caloric expenditure would have made this strategy viable in cold environments where conserving energy was critical. The Ice Age also saw the development of the first true hunting specializations, technologies developed for specific prey in specific contexts. The barbed harpoons of the European Magdalenian culture, circa 17,000 to 12,000 years ago, for instance, were specifically designed for fishing and hunting aquatic mammals, with their barbs ensuring that once embedded, the point would not easily dislodge from the moving target. These weren't generalized tools, but highly specialized ones, representing significant investment in technique and manufacturing time. Perhaps the most impressive specialized hunting technology was the bolus, weighted stones connected by cordage that could be thrown to entangle the legs of prey animals. Evidence for boluses has been found at sites in Argentina dating to around 11,000 years ago, used by early hunters of guanaco and rhea. The physics of the bolus is complex. The weights must be carefully balanced, and the cords precisely the right length. It represents a sophisticated understanding of rotational dynamics developed through careful observation and experimentation. Ice Age hunting wasn't limited to large mammals. Evidence suggests that humans were also harvesting smaller prey, including birds and rabbits, using snares and traps. These passive hunting methods allowed humans to effectively gather protein while engaging in other activities, a crucial efficiency in environments where every calorie expended needed to return maximum value. The most impressive aspect of Ice Age hunting technology isn't any single innovation, but the systematic approach to problem-solving it represents. Hunters weren't just making tools, they were creating integrated systems of technology adapted to specific prey, environments, and seasonal conditions. A proper hunting kit might include weapons for initial strikes, backup weapons for close encounters, butchering tools, carrying devices for transporting meat, and specialized tools for processing hides and other animal products. This systematic approach extended to the organization of hunting itself. Evidence from multiple sites suggests carefully planned seasonal hunting patterns timed to intercept migrations or target prey when they were in optimal condition. Some groups appear to have followed herds, while others established territories that included diverse resource zones they could exploit at different times of year. These weren't random subsistence strategies, but sophisticated systems developed through careful observation of animal behavior and environmental patterns. The relationship between hunting technology and social organization is particularly interesting. Some hunting methods, like pursuing large herd animals, required group coordination. Others, like trapping smaller mammals, could be performed by individuals. This diversity of methods meant that both collective and individual hunting contributed to group survival, creating complex interdependencies within bands. One often overlooked aspect of Ice Age hunting technology is its symbolic dimension. Many hunting tools were decorated with engravings or carvings that went far beyond functional necessity. Spear throwers carved to resemble animals, projectile points inscribed with geometric patterns, even butchering tools decorated with incised lines. These suggest that hunting technology wasn't understood in purely utilitarian terms, but was embedded in a rich symbolic world that connected hunters to their prey and perhaps to supernatural forces believed to influence hunting success. As the Ice Age drew to a close, hunting technologies continued to evolve in response to changing environments and prey species. The extinction of many megafauna species around 11,000 years ago, due to some combination of climate change and human predation, forced a shift towards smaller prey, requiring different hunting strategies. The diversification of ecosystems during the early Holocene led to increasingly regionalized hunting technologies adapted to local conditions and available species. The legacy of Ice Age hunting technology extends far beyond the Pleistocene. Many fundamental principles established during this period, composite tools, projectile systems, specialized processing implements, remained central to human subsistence until the advent of agriculture, and continued in many regions long afterward. Even today, modern hunting equipment reflects principles first established when humans were pursuing mammoths rather than deer. What's particularly striking about Ice Age hunting technology is that it developed without written language, formal educational systems, or scientific institutions. Knowledge was transmitted through direct demonstration, oral tradition, and apprenticeship. Yet the sophistication of the technologies produced rivals, anything we might expect from a modern engineering approach, reflecting the power of cumulative cultural evolution, driven by the most fundamental pressure of all: survival in a world where a failed hunt could mean starvation. The wind outside has shifted, carrying snow now instead of just bitter cold. You retreat from its howl into the entrance of a limestone cave, one of many dotting this valley, carved by ancient glaciers. The temperature inside rises noticeably with each step deeper, and soon you enter a chamber illuminated by fire's glow. Around you stand structures of mammoth bone ribs arranged in careful arcs, tusks embedded in the ground as load-bearing columns. This isn't just shelter from the elements, this is home, creating effective shelter during the Ice Age presented unique challenges that pushed human ingenuity to its limits. The solutions they developed, from cave modifications to complex freestanding structures, reveal sophisticated understanding of materials, insulation principles, and structural engineering, all developed without formal scientific knowledge. Caves provided the most obvious shelter solution, and many famous Ice Age archaeological sites are indeed found in caves and rock shelters. But we should disabuse ourselves of the notion that early humans simply wandered into convenient natural caverns and set up house. The archaeological evidence reveals something far more sophisticated: systematic modification and improvement of natural spaces to enhance their protective qualities. Take the cave sites of southern France's Dordogne region. Excavations reveal that inhabitants often built stone walls to enclose cave entrances, creating airlocks that prevented heat loss and blocked wind. They constructed internal walls to create separate activity areas and improve heat retention. Some caves show evidence of channels cut into the floor to direct water away from living spaces, primitive drainage systems that kept living areas dry during spring melt. There's a quirky tidbit about Ice Age cave sites that rarely makes it into popular accounts. Many weren't continuously occupied, but were used seasonally as part of a carefully planned annual round. A band might use a south-facing cave with good sun exposure during winter months, then move to a cooler rock shelter during summer. This wasn't random movement, but a sophisticated adaptation to the way different shelter types performed across seasons. But caves, however modified, presented limitations. They were fixed locations that couldn't be moved to follow game herds. They were sometimes located far from critical resources like water or toolstone. And perhaps most significantly, there simply weren't enough suitable caves in many landscapes to house all the human groups seeking shelter. Innovation became necessary. The most spectacular Ice Age dwellings were the mammoth bone huts found across the central Russian plain, with the most famous examples from measurage dating to around 15,000 years ago. These structures weren't crude piles of bones, but carefully engineered dwellings that used mammoth remains as a construction material in a landscape where wood was scarce. A typical mammoth bone hut began with a foundation of skulls and large bones partially embedded in the ground in a rough circle ranging from 4 to 6 meters in diameter. Mammoth tusks, jawbones, and shoulder blades were arranged to create a conical frame, with smaller bones and antlers filling gaps between larger elements. The entire structure was likely covered with animal hides sewn together, and possibly additional layers of insulating material such as moss or grass. The engineering principles involved were surprisingly sophisticated. The circular design minimized surface area relative to volume, reducing heat loss. The dome shape shed snow efficiently and resisted wind from all directions. Interior hearths were typically positioned in the center, allowing heat to radiate evenly throughout the structure. Some sites even show evidence of semi-subterranean construction. The dwelling floor was excavated below ground level to take advantage of the earth's insulating properties. What's particularly impressive about these dwellings is the logistics involved in their construction. Each structure required bones from 50-60 individual mammoths. While some of these may have been collected from natural deaths, the sheer quantity suggests intentional stockpiling of construction materials. Over time, evidence of long-term planning and resource management that contradicts older stereotypes of primitive hunter-gatherers living hand-to-mouth. In regions with more abundant wood, evidence suggests that humans constructed sophisticated timber-framed structures. At Dolní Věstonice, in what is now the Czech Republic, archaeologists found traces of what appear to be wooden lodges with central hearths and clay-lined pits for storage. These weren't temporary shelters, but semi-permanent dwellings that could house extended family groups through the harsh winter months. An ongoing scholarly debate centers on whether some Ice Age structures might have included primitive forms of insulation beyond animal hides. Some sites contain large quantities of grass phytoliths, microscopic silica structures from plant cells that some researchers interpret as evidence of grass thatch or stuffing used as insulation material. Others suggest these plant remains might simply represent bedding or flooring materials. What's clear is that Ice Age humans were utilizing a diverse range of materials to create effective barriers against the cold. One fascinating aspect of Ice Age dwellings is their interior organization. Many sites show clear evidence of activity areas, specific zones for flint knapping, food preparation, sleeping, and other tasks. This wasn't random, but represented careful organization of limited interior space to accommodate multiple activities and likely multiple family units. Some structures show evidence of internal divisions, not quite rooms in the modern sense, but designated areas that served specific functions. The hearth was invariably the central feature of Ice Age dwellings, serving multiple functions beyond just providing warmth. Hearths were cooking facilities, light sources, focal points for social gathering, and in many cases, craft production areas where tasks requiring good light and warmth could be performed. The positioning of hearths wasn't haphazard, but reflected careful consideration of heat distribution, smoke management, and interior traffic patterns. Speaking of smoke, managing it presented a significant challenge in enclosed Ice Age dwellings. Without formal chimneys, inhabitants needed ways to allow smoke to escape while minimizing heat loss. Some reconstructions suggest that structures likely included adjustable vents near the top that could be opened to release smoke and closed to retain heat when the fire burned down. It's a simple but elegant solution to a complex engineering problem of balancing ventilation and insulation. In the harshest environments, particularly during the last glacial maximum around 20,000 years ago. Evidence suggests that some groups developed what might be called composite shelters, structures that combined elements of both built dwellings and natural features. A rock overhang might be enclosed with a wall of bones or stones, then covered with hides to create an effective hybrid shelter that maximized the advantages of both approaches. Shelter construction wasn't just a practical matter, but likely had significant social dimensions. Ethnographic evidence from recent hunter-gatherer societies suggests that dwelling construction and maintenance often involved specific gender roles and social obligations. The creation of shelter wasn't simply about piling up materials, but was embedded in a complex social system that determined who did what, when, and how. These social aspects rarely leave archaeological traces, but were almost certainly central to how Ice Age communities organized shelter creation. The sophistication of Ice Age dwellings varied considerably across time and space. Sites dating to the earlier parts of the Upper Paleolithic, around 40,000 years ago, generally show simpler structures than those from the Magdalenian period, around 17,001 to 000 years ago. This suggests a process of cumulative improvement as techniques were refined and knowledge accumulated across generations. An early example of cultural evolution driven by environmental pressure. Even within the same time period, dwelling types could vary dramatically between regions, reflecting local adaptations to specific conditions. The mammoth bone huts of Eastern Europe have no exact parallels in Western Europe, where different solutions emerged based on available materials and specific environmental challenges. This regional diversity highlights the creativity and adaptability of Ice Age populations. One aspect of Ice Age shelter that's often overlooked is portable shelter technology, essentially the first tents. Evidence is sparse given the perishable nature of the materials involved, but traces of what appear to be tent rings, circles of stones, used to secure the edges of hide coverings, have been found at numerous sites. These portable shelters allowed for mobility, while still providing crucial protection from the elements, representing an important complement to more substantial, seasonal dwellings. Interestingly, some Ice Age shelter technologies appear to have incorporated elements of passive solar heating. Numerous sites show a preference for south-facing locations that would have maximized sun exposure during winter months. Some structures appear to have been designed with lower entrances on the south side and higher backs on the north, creating a natural tendency to capture and retain solar heat, a principle still used in sustainable architecture today. As climates fluctuated throughout the Ice Age, shelter technologies adapted rapidly. During the coldest periods, evidence suggests more investment in substantial, insulated structures. During warmer interstadials, lighter, more mobile shelter types appear to have been favored. This wasn't a linear progression from simple to complex, but a dynamic response to changing environmental conditions. The end of the Pleistocene brought significant changes to human shelter strategies. As temperatures warmed and environments transformed, many of the extreme adaptations necessary during glacial periods became less critical. Yet many of the principles developed during the Ice Age, effective insulation, strategic use of materials, attention to heating and ventilation, remained fundamental to human dwelling construction for millennia afterward. What's perhaps most remarkable about Ice Age shelter technology is that it developed without formal architectural knowledge, written plans, or scientific understanding of concepts like thermal transfer or structural mechanics. Solutions emerged through observation, experimentation, and the accumulation of generational knowledge. When a particular approach worked, it was remembered and transmitted. When it failed, alternatives were developed. These dwellings weren't just physical structures, but home in the fullest sense, places where children were born and raised, where cultural knowledge was transmitted, where identities were formed. The physical traces archaeologists uncover: hearths, post holes, activity areas, are the remnants not just of ingenious shelter solutions, but of lived human experience in one of the most challenging environments our species has ever faced. The next time you adjust your thermostat or complain about a drafty window, spare a thought for your Ice Age ancestors who maintained comfortable microclimates in the midst of a frozen world, using nothing but the materials nature provided and the cumulative wisdom of countless generations who had faced the cold before them. The darkness has settled now, thick as fur around the shelter. Inside, the glow of embers illuminates a dozen faces, weather-worn, attentive, alive with conversation, despite the killing cold beyond the walls. A child laughs as an elder demonstrates a particularly difficult knot using sinew thread. Two hunters quietly compare notes on animal tracks they observed that morning. A group works cooperatively to repair a damaged spear. This isn't just a collection of individuals seeking warmth. This is a social tapestry woven tight against the fatal chill of isolation. The human capacity for complex social organization represents one of our species' most powerful adaptations to the Ice Age environment. While the technologies we've discussed in previous sections, fire, clothing, weapons, shelters, were undeniably crucial, equally important were the social structures that allowed knowledge to accumulate, resources to be shared, and groups to make collective decisions in the face of environmental challenges. The basic social unit of Ice Age humans was the band, a flexible group typically comprising several family units, usually numbering between 20-30 individuals in total. This wasn't a random grouping, but a finely tuned social adaptation. A band needed to be large enough to maintain viability through cooperative hunting, childcare, and knowledge sharing, yet small enough to remain mobile, and not overburden local resources. The composition of these bands showed remarkable sophistication. Archaeological evidence from burial sites and camp layouts suggests that bands typically included individuals of various ages and both sexes. This demographic diversity served crucial functions. Older members, particularly elders who might not participate directly in hunting, nonetheless carried irreplaceable knowledge, mental maps of resources, techniques for tool making, understanding of animal behavior, and medicinal plant knowledge accumulated over decades. There's a quirky tidbit about Ice Age social structure that deserves mention. Evidence suggests bands maintained connections with other bands across surprisingly large distances. Small portable art objects made from distinctive materials have been found hundreds of kilometers from their sources, indicating either long-distance travel or, more likely, interband exchange networks that maintained connections between otherwise separate groups. These interband networks served critical adaptive functions. They facilitated mate exchange, preventing dangerous inbreeding in small populations. They provided safety nets during local resource failures. If game disappeared from one band's territory, social connections might allow temporary access to another group's resources. Perhaps most importantly, they created channels for information exchange, allowing innovations developed in one location to spread across landscapes. The sophistication of these networks is evident in the archaeological record through the distribution of distinctive artifact styles and exotic materials. For example, seashells from the Mediterranean have been found at sites hundreds of kilometers inland, and specific artistic motifs appear across vast regions with remarkable consistency. These weren't random similarities, but evidence of deliberate, maintained connections between groups. An ongoing scholarly debate centers on exactly how these networks functioned. Some researchers favor a model of periodic aggregation, where separate bands would come together at specific times and places, perhaps seasonally, at particularly abundant resource locations, for social exchanges, rituals, mate finding, and information sharing. Others suggest more regular, smaller exchanges between neighboring bands. The truth likely involves a combination of both patterns, adapted to specific regional conditions. Within bands, social cooperation was essential for survival. The archaeological evidence from Ice Age sites consistently shows tasks that required multiple people working in coordination. Consider mammoth hunting. Bringing down an animal weighing up to 10 tons, then processing its enormous carcass, required coordinated effort from numerous individuals playing different roles. This wasn't just physical cooperation, but cognitive collaboration, planning, communication, role assignment, and the fair distribution of resulting resources. Evidence for this cooperation appears in multiple forms in the archaeological record. Butchery sites often show systematic processing that would have required multiple individuals working together in an organized sequence. Dwelling construction, particularly the mammoth bone huts we discussed earlier, represents massive cooperative undertakings requiring planned labor distribution. Even more subtle evidence comes from tool production sites, where the spatial arrangement of debris suggests individuals working together, perhaps with some specializing in different stages of the manufacturing process. Speaking of specialization, the Ice Age may have seen the beginnings of task specialization within groups, not yet formal occupations, but the recognition that certain individuals possessed specific skills that benefited the entire band. Particularly fine examples of craftsmanship in the archaeological record: an exceptionally well-made spear point, an intricately carved ornament, suggest individuals who had developed specialized expertise beyond the general skill level of the group. This division of labor likely extended to age and gender roles, though interpreting these aspects from archaeological evidence remains challenging. Ethnographic analogies with recent hunter-gatherer societies suggest that most tasks were probably not rigidly gendered, with considerable flexibility based on individual abilities and group needs. However, certain specialized activities may have shown patterns of participation based on physical capabilities or accumulated experience. The Ice Age social order appears to have been relatively egalitarian compared to later stratified societies. Burial evidence generally shows no extreme disparities in grave goods that would suggest rigid social hierarchies. This makes adaptive sense. In small groups facing extreme environmental challenges, cooperation was more valuable than competition, and the group's survival depended on all members contributing according to their abilities. However, this doesn't mean these societies lacked leadership. Rather than permanent chiefs, Ice Age bands likely featured what anthropologists call situational leadership, different individuals taking lead roles in different contexts based on their specific knowledge or skills. The best tracker might lead a hunting expedition. The most experienced hide worker might direct a clothing production effort. A particularly knowledgeable elder might guide the band's seasonal movements. Leadership was likely earned through demonstrated competence rather than inherited status. The transmission of knowledge within these social systems was sophisticated and vital for survival. Without written language, Ice Age groups relied on direct demonstration, oral tradition, and supervised practice to pass crucial information between generations. This wasn't a simple process, but a complex pedagogical system. Archaeological evidence for apprenticeship appears in the form of worked materials, showing signs of different skill levels. Master craftswork, alongside learners' attempts, often in the same living spaces. Consider the cognitive demands of this knowledge transmission. An experienced Ice Age hunter didn't just know how to track animals. They carried mental maps of territories spanning hundreds of square kilometers, understood the behavior patterns of dozens of species, recognized thousands of plant varieties and their properties, maintained technical knowledge of tool production sequences, and held social information about neighboring bands. All this information had to be effectively encoded, stored, and transmitted without writing. The social fabric of Ice Age life extended beyond practical cooperation to include ritual and symbolic dimensions that strengthened group cohesion. The evidence for collective ritual appears at numerous sites, most dramatically in cave art galleries that appear designed for group participation. These weren't just aesthetic expressions, but social technologies that reinforced shared identity and helped band members understand their place in the world. Perhaps the most striking evidence for social complexity comes from burials. Even the earliest known intentional burials from this period show careful arrangement of the body, inclusion of grave goods, and sometimes elaborate ornamentation, all suggesting complex beliefs about death and perhaps an afterlife. More importantly, they represent significant investment of group resources and energy in honoring deceased members, indicating strong social bonds that transcended immediate practical concerns. Family structures during the Ice Age remain somewhat speculative, though genetic evidence from ancient DNA is beginning to offer new insights. The current thinking suggests flexible family arrangements that prioritized childcare and resource sharing, rather than isolated nuclear families. Evidence points toward more communal childcaring arrangements, a pattern that makes adaptive sense in environments where adult mortality was high and reliable food provisioning required multiple providers. This cooperative childcare model appears in the archaeological record through evidence like small handprints in cave art, suggesting children's presence during ritual activities, and tiny footprints preserved in cave clay floors, often alongside adult prints. These weren't separate adult and child worlds, but integrated social environments where learning occurred through observation and incremental participation in group activities. The extreme environment of the Ice Age placed particular emphasis on social mechanisms for sharing risk and resources. Ethnographic studies of hunter-gatherers in harsh environments consistently show elaborate systems for food sharing that ensure no individual or family unit bears the full brunt of hunting or gathering failure. Archaeological evidence suggests similar patterns in Ice Age societies, particularly in the processing and distribution of large game animals, where cut marks and bone distributions indicate systematic sharing rather than individual consumption. These sharing systems weren't simply altruistic, but represented sophisticated social insurance policies. By distributing both resources and risk across the group, bands increased their collective chances of survival. The hunter who returned empty-handed today would be fed from another success, with the understanding that the pattern might reverse tomorrow. Over time, this leveling mechanism helped ensure the survival of the maximum number of group members through inevitable periods of scarcity. As the Ice Age progressed, there's evidence that social networks became increasingly elaborate and geographically extensive. By the late Upper Paleolithic, around 20,000 to 12,000 years ago, distinctive artistic traditions covered enormous areas. The Magdalenian culture stretched across much of Western Europe, for instance, suggesting increasingly standardized systems of symbolic communication that facilitated interaction between distant groups. These expanded networks represented a crucial adaptation to Ice Age conditions, creating what we might call social storage, resources embedded not in physical caches, but in reciprocal relationships that could be activated during times of need. The more connections a band maintained with others, the more options it had during environmental crises, from local game depletion to sudden climate shifts. As the Ice Age drew to a close, around 11,700 years ago, these elaborate social systems laid the groundwork for the even more complex societies that would emerge during the Holocene. The capabilities for collective action, information sharing, and coordinated resource management developed during the Pleistocene provided the foundation for the eventual development of agriculture, permanent settlements, and ultimately civilization as we understand it. What's perhaps most remarkable about Ice Age social structures is that they developed without formal institutions, written rules, or hierarchical enforcement mechanisms. They were emergent systems shaped by environmental pressures and the pragmatic requirements of survival. Yet, they achieved remarkable sophistication, allowing small bands of humans to survive and even thrive in environments that should, by all rights, have been beyond their biological capacities. The next time you find yourself cooperating with others to solve a problem, spare a thought for your Ice Age ancestors. The social instincts that feel so natural to you, the tendency to share information, divide labor, establish reciprocal relationships, and maintain social networks, were refined across thousands of generations in the crucible of the harshest environment humans have ever faced. We are, in a very real sense, the inheritors of social adaptations forged in ice. You've made it this far through the frozen hell of prehistory, but there's something we've yet to fully address. The shivering human mind, trying to make sense of all this cold, darkness, and constant proximity to death. While you've mastered hunting mammoth and sewing waterproof boots from intestines, your species has also been developing something equally crucial for survival, meaning-making systems that transform the terrifying randomness of Ice Age existence into something comprehensible. Night has fallen outside your shelter. The wind howls with particular malice tonight, and something wolf or hyena, or something worse, screams in the distance. Inside, firelight dances on the cave walls, and an elder begins to trace figures in the soot with her finger. This moment, this seemingly simple act, represents one of humanity's most profound adaptations to the Ice Age, the emergence of symbolic thought and spiritual practice. Archaeological evidence suggests that by 40,000 years ago, humans had developed rich, symbolic lives. The caves of Chauvet in France preserve some of the earliest evidence of this flowering consciousness. Lions, rhinos, and horses, rendered with such sensitivity that they seem to breathe, even after 32,000 years. But these weren't mere decorations. They were portals into a spirit world that helped make sense of the brutal, seemingly chaotic existence that was life during the last glacial maximum. We tend to dismiss early spiritual practices as primitive superstition, whispers a scholarly voice in your ear, but that misses their profound adaptive function. They created social cohesion, transmitted vital knowledge across generations, and provided psychological tools for managing extreme stress. Your community has developed rituals that mark the turning of seasons, crucial knowledge when your survival depends on anticipating weather patterns. During the darkest days of winter, your people gather for ceremonies involving elaborate headdresses made from reindeer antlers and cave bear skulls. You beat drums fashioned from stretched mammoth skin across hollow mammoth bones, the resonance physically altering your brain chemistry, inducing trance states that temporarily liberate you from the constant vigilance required by ice age survival. And yes, you occasionally consume psychoactive substances, certain mushrooms and plants that grow even in these harsh conditions. Archaeological evidence suggests that shamanic practices involving altered states of consciousness were widespread during the Upper Paleolithic. These weren't recreational escapes. They were sophisticated technologies for accessing what your community perceives as hidden dimensions of reality, where knowledge essential for survival might be obtained. The bone flutes found in sites like Hohlfels Cave in Germany, dating to around 40,000 years ago, suggest that music was already an established part of human culture. As your community huddles against the bitter cold, these haunting melodies create a shared emotional experience that strengthens social bonds. The songs contain encoded information about migration patterns, hunting techniques, and medicinal plants, a pleasing mnemonic device for passing down critical survival knowledge. Your people have also developed a complex relationship with the animals upon which your lives depend. Before a hunt, elaborate rituals are performed to ensure success and honor the spirits of prey animals. In the flickering firelight, a shaman wearing a deer skull headdress mimics the movements of the animals, creating a supernatural bridge between hunter and hunted. Archaeological evidence from sites across Europe reveals ceremonial burials of cave bears, suggesting complex beliefs about human-animal relationships and perhaps attempts to appease powerful animal spirits. I once met a researcher who'd spent 40 years studying Ice Age cave art. The scholarly voice continues, and she insisted that these weren't just representations, but attempts to part the veil between worlds, placing handprints on cave walls as a way of reaching through to some other dimension, leaving evidence of human presence in places of power. Death is your constant companion in the Ice Age, and your community has developed specific practices for managing it. Grave goods found at burial sites from this period, red ochre, jewelry, tools, and weapons, suggest belief in an afterlife, or at least a symbolic acknowledgement of social identity that transcends death. When an elder dies, their body is carefully positioned, sprinkled with red ochre, possibly symbolizing blood and life, and adorned with items that defined their social role. For a hunter, this might include spear points. For a healer, a collection of unusual stones or bones used in rituals. As you venture deeper into ice-gripped territories, your community carries portable art, small figurines carved from mammoth ivory, like the famous Venus statues found across Europe. These exaggerated female forms, with emphasized sexual and reproductive features, might represent fertility symbols, protective talismans, or perhaps the earliest religious icons. You touch the small figurine tucked into your garment before facing particularly dangerous challenges, drawing comfort from its familiar weight and the beliefs it embodies. The most remarkable aspect of these spiritual technologies is how they transform the very landscape around you. That mountain isn't just a mountain, it's where the ancestors first emerged. That river isn't just water, it's the boundary between the world of the living and the dead. These aren't mere superstitions, but sophisticated cognitive adaptations that convert threatening, unpredictable environments into meaningful, navigable terrains. We found evidence that certain caves were used exclusively for ritual purposes, the scholarly voice adds, with particular acoustical properties that enhance altered states of consciousness, natural cathedrals that amplified whispers or transformed them into otherworldly echoes. Some of your spiritual practices are pragmatic disguised as supernatural. The taboo against hunting certain animals during specific seasons ensures you don't deplete crucial resources. Rituals that require sharing meat distribute protein more equally through the community. Even your ghost stories serve a purpose, keeping children from wandering off alone into dangerous territories by populating them with malevolent spirits. Handprints found in caves across Europe suggest rituals involving physical contact with sacred surfaces. By placing your hand against the cool stone and blowing pigment around it, creating a negative handprint, you establish a connection with something enduring in a world where everything else seems transient and uncertain. Thousands of years later, archaeologists will debate whether these handprints belonged predominantly to women, men, or adolescents undergoing initiation rites. The night deepens, and the elder stories grow more elaborate. Tales of ancestor spirits who guide the hunt, of powerful animals who taught humans the secrets of fire and tool making, of transformations and journeys between worlds. These aren't just entertainment, they're sophisticated packages of cultural information, binding your community together and providing frameworks for interpreting everything from weather patterns to interpersonal conflicts. The cognitive leap required for spiritual thinking may have been one of humanity's most significant adaptations, whispers the scholarly voice. The ability to conceive of unseen forces and realms required the same mental machinery that allowed for planning, hypothetical thinking, and innovation, all crucial survival skills. The archaeological record reveals the fascinating material side of these spiritual practices. Bone wands, decorated with intricate carvings, clay figurines showing evidence of intentional destruction in ritual contexts, and stone arrangements aligned with solar or lunar events at sites like Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic. Researchers have found what appear to be the remains of rituals involving the intentional explosion of clay figurines in fire, perhaps symbolizing transformation or serving some divinatory purpose. When a member of your group falls ill, healing doesn't just involve practical herbal remedies, but elaborate ceremonies addressing the spiritual dimensions of sickness. The healer enters a trance state, journeying to retrieve the patient's wandering soul or negotiate with spirits believed to cause illness. These ceremonies serve psychological functions we're only beginning to understand. Placebo effects, activated through ritual, community support, mobilized through shared participation, and cognitive reframing that helps patients contextualize their suffering. Perhaps most importantly, your spiritual practices provide a framework for answering the fundamental questions that arise even or especially during the desperate business of Ice Age survival. Why do some hunters return and others don't? Why do some winters last longer than others? Why are we here at all? The answers your community develops aren't scientific in the modern sense, but they perform the essential function of making your world coherent and meaningful, rather than random and terrifying. As dawn approaches, the elder's voice grows hoarse from hours of storytelling. The fire burns low, and you drift toward sleep, wrapped in layers of fur, your mind filled with images of spirit animals and ancestor journeys. This too is survival, the comfort of shared meaning, the power of belonging to something that transcends your individual struggle against the cold. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, hunting, gathering, tool-making, but tonight's stories have renewed something essential within you, the will to continue, the sense that your suffering has meaning, that you belong in this world, harsh as it may be. The last glacial maximum around 20,000 years ago saw ice sheets covering vast portions of the northern hemisphere. Scandinavia disappeared beneath kilometers of ice. Britain and Ireland vanished under a frozen carapace. The Alps became an impenetrable frozen fortress. North America lay buried from the Arctic Circle to what would one day become New York. And yet, somehow, people kept moving. What's fascinating, the scholarly voice interjects softly, is that these weren't coordinated, planned migrations in the modern sense. These were incremental shifts, generation by generation, following animals, responding to local climate changes, perhaps occasionally motivated by conflict or curiosity. Your ancestors had already achieved something remarkable long before the worst cold of the Ice Age descended. Between 60,000 and 50,000 years ago, modern humans left Africa, crossed the Middle East, and began spreading across Asia and Europe. By 45,000 years ago, they had reached Australia, crossing water gaps that even during the lowest sea levels of the Ice Age required some form of watercraft. Think about that for a moment. People using Stone Age technology were confident enough on water to voyage beyond the visible horizon. Perhaps they were simply incredibly lucky, but archaeological evidence suggests intentional colonization rather than accidental drift. The European landscape your ancestors encountered was nothing like today's. The English Channel was a broad river valley where mammoths grazed. The Mediterranean had expanded shorelines because so much water was locked in ice. The Black Sea was smaller, and the Adriatic extended much less far north. As they pushed into these new territories, your ancestors encountered Neanderthals, close cousins who had already adapted to cold conditions over hundreds of thousands of years. These encounters likely ranged from conflict to cooperation to interbreeding. Yes, if you're of Eurasian descent, approximately 1 to 4% of your DNA comes from Neanderthals, a parting gift from these Ice Age meetings. Neanderthals had larger brains than modern humans, more robust physiques, and technology adapted specifically for cold weather survival. And yet, within about 5,000 years of modern humans arriving in Europe, Neanderthals disappeared completely. Was it competition for resources, direct conflict, or simply the advantages of our ancestors' more sophisticated social structures and symbolic thinking? Archaeological evidence remains ambiguous, though the scholarly consensus leans toward multiple factors rather than a single cause for Neanderthal extinction. Imagine the stories that would have been told around fires, whispers the scholarly voice, as bands of modern humans encountered Neanderthals for the first time, beings so similar yet different, with their heavy brows, powerful bodies, and unfamiliar vocalizations. What myths might have emerged from these meetings? Your ancestors proved remarkably adaptable as they pushed northward. As the ice sheets advanced and retreated through multiple cold pulses, human populations shifted accordingly. During the coldest periods, much of northern Europe became uninhabitable, creating a population bottleneck in the southern peninsulas, Iberia, Italy, and the Balkans, that served as refugia where humans and many animal species survived. When conditions temporarily improved, they would expand northward again, following the retreating ice and the herds of reindeer, horse, and bison that provided sustenance. The archaeological record reveals these shifting population patterns through distinctive tool technologies. The Aurignacian culture spread across Europe around 43,000 to 26,000 years ago, followed by the Gravettian, known for its distinctive Venus figurines. Later came the Solutrean culture of southwestern Europe, remarkable for its exquisitely worked stone tools. And finally, the Magdalenian, which saw humans recolonize northern Europe as the ice began its final retreat around 17,000 years ago. These weren't just shifts in technology, but evidence of complex cultural adaptations to changing climatic conditions. Each new territory required learning new plant resources, understanding different animal behavior, and developing specific shelter strategies for the local microclimate. Knowledge had to be accumulated quickly through trial and often fatal error, and transmitted effectively to ensure group survival. We see evidence in the archaeological record. The scholarly voice continues of long-distance trade networks even during the harshest periods of the Ice Age. Shells from the Mediterranean have been found hundreds of miles inland. Amber traveled from the Baltic region throughout Europe, and distinctive flint types sometimes moved over 300 miles from their source. Meanwhile, an entirely different drama of human migration was unfolding across the Bering Land Bridge, Beringia, a vast tundra plain connecting Siberia and Alaska, exposed by lowered sea levels. For decades, archaeologists believed humans crossed this bridge around 13,000 years ago, representing the first colonization of the Americas. But recent discoveries have pushed this date back significantly, with sites like Monte Verde in Chile providing compelling evidence of human presence by at least 14,500 years ago, and more controversial claims suggesting dates as early as 30,000 years ago. The journey these first Americans undertook was nothing short of extraordinary. They had to navigate an ice-free corridor between two massive ice sheets, or, as more recent evidence suggests, follow a coastal route down the Pacific Northwest, using boats to island hop along the glacial shoreline. Within a remarkably short period, perhaps just a millennium or two, humans had spread throughout North and South America, adapting to environments as diverse as the Arctic tundra and the Amazon rainforest. This rapid colonization coincided with the extinction of numerous large mammal species across the Americas. Mastodons, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and many others vanished shortly after human arrival. While climate change certainly played a role in these extinctions, the timing strongly suggests that human hunting may have delivered the coup de grace to already stressed populations. Your ancestors were not just passive respondents to ice age conditions. They were active ecological engineers, reshaping environments wherever they went. We sometimes forget, the scholarly voice notes, that these migrations weren't just about following food sources. They were also escapes from disaster, volcanic eruptions, like the Campanian ignimbrite around 39,000 years ago, which blanketed much of southeastern Europe in ash, or sudden cold snaps, like the Younger Dryas around 12,900 years ago, which plunged Europe back into near-glacial conditions after warming had begun. The genetic evidence of these ancient migrations is written in your own DNA. Mitochondrial haplogroups, genetic markers passed exclusively through the maternal line, allow researchers to trace population movements with remarkable precision. Haplogroup U5, for instance, is considered the oldest European-specific haplogroup, having arrived there around 50,000 years ago. Haplogroup X has a puzzling distribution, appearing in both Europe and among some Native American populations, suggesting complex migration patterns not yet fully understood. As the ice began its final retreat around 11,700 years ago, marking the end of the Pleistocene and the beginning of our current epoch, the Holocene, human migration patterns shifted again. Rising sea levels drowned coastal settlements and created new islands, separating previously connected landmasses. Britain became an island again around 8,200 years ago, when the land bridge connecting it to continental Europe finally flooded. The warming climate also set the stage for perhaps the most significant migration in human history, not of people, but of lifestyle. As temperatures rose and environments stabilized, the conditions became favorable for experimentation with plant cultivation and animal domestication. The first agricultural societies emerged in the Fertile Crescent around 10,000 years ago, shortly after the end of the Ice Age, suggesting that the warming climate created conditions conducive to this revolutionary change in human subsistence. These early farmers would begin their own migrations, carrying their new technology and genetic lineages across Europe, encountering and eventually absorbing or displacing the hunter-gatherer populations descended from the Ice Age migrants we've been following. This agricultural expansion represents the final chapter in our Ice Age migration story, the transition to a new way of life that would ultimately give rise to villages, cities, and civilization as we know it. What's remarkable, concludes the scholarly voice, is how these migrations have left their mark, not just in the archaeological record, but in the very structure of modern human genetic diversity. We carry within us the echoes of these ancient journeys, genetic signatures of adaptations to cold, of population bottlenecks, of encounters with other hominin species. Think of those ancient hands pressing against cave walls, leaving their mark for you to find millennia later. Think of the first humans to crest a hill and see an entirely new landscape spread before them, territory where no human had ever set foot. Think of the first person to twist plant fibers into string, to shape clay into a vessel, to realize that certain plants could heal rather than harm. Each of these moments was a quiet victory in humanity's long struggle against the ice. Each innovation, each adaptation, each successful migration carried our species forward, preserved our collective knowledge, expanded our territories, and ultimately ensured that you would one day exist. The cold that seemed so unbearable at the beginning of our story now feels distant, replaced by the warmth of understanding. How remarkably resilient your species has always been. That same resilience lives in you still, the capacity to adapt, to create, to endure hardship, and to find meaning even in the most challenging circumstances. As you release this story into the darkness behind your closed eyelids, let your mind drift from the image of ancient hunters tracking mammoth across the tundra, from the sound of bone needles working through hide, from the taste of meals cooked over open flames. Let the ice age recede back into prehistory where it belongs, having served its purpose in carrying you towards sleep. Your breathing slows now. Your thoughts grow less distinct. The weight of your body against your bed becomes the only sensation that matters. Sleep approaches like a warm front, pushing against the glaciers of wakefulness, promising dreams that may carry echoes of our story, but belong entirely to you. Good night. Rest well, and perhaps dream of ancient stars wheeling above a world transformed by ice.